When Russia launched its latest assault on Kiev, the world held its breath, but no one expected what came next. Within hours, Ukraine struck back not with hesitation, not with fear, but with precision and fury. The retaliation was instant, dark, and strategic. For the first time in months, Moscow's war machine looked vulnerable, fractured, and disoriented. Reports began to emerge that the legendary General Winter, the same bitter cold that once saved Russia from Napoleon and Hitler, has now turned against it. Supply lines froze, machinery jammed, and the very landscape that once shielded Russian troops became their enemy. In the freezing mud of eastern Ukraine, it wasn't just tanks that were stuck, it was an empire grinding to a halt. Ukraine's response was not a simple act of revenge. It was a demonstration of adaptation, the hallmark of every nation that refuses to die. Ukrainian intelligence had been preparing for this moment for months, mapping the logistics of Russian winter convoys, predicting the choke points where frost would cripple mobility. So when Russia advanced, Ukraine unleashed a counterstrike that targeted fuel depots, communication grids, and forward operating bases, the arteries of any modern army. Suddenly, what was meant to be Russia's winter offensive turned into a nightmare of isolation and retreat. And that's the irony of war. When arrogance meets resilience, history sides with those who refuse to surrender. But beyond the battlefield lies a deeper truth. The Russian people are beginning to question the cost not just in rubles, but in lives, in dignity, in the global standing of their nation. The propaganda that once painted this war as liberation now struggles to hide the economic ruin it has unleashed. Inflation soars, sanctions tighten, and the elite hoard what remains of the wealth, while the working class pays the price. This is not just a military conflict, it's a war of economics, a struggle of systems, a clash between authoritarian illusion and democratic desperation. And as I've said for decades, when an empire overreaches economically, its collapse is not a question of if, but when. Ukraine, meanwhile, is not fighting with unlimited resources, it's fighting with spirit, with Western support, and with the haunting memory of what it means to lose freedom. Every missile launched from Kiev is not just an act of defense. It's a message to the world that oppression will not go unanswered. As temperatures drop, the resolve of the Ukrainian people burns hotter. Cities once under siege are rebuilding. Economies once shattered are adapting through ingenuity and unity. What Russia believed would be its season of triumph has become its season of exposure, a moment when even nature seems to have chosen sides. And the panic spreading through Russian command structures is not just about lost ground, it's about lost faith. Soldiers who once marched under the illusion of glory are now fighting for survival, often without fuel, without warmth, and without clarity about why. That's the cruelest betrayal of all, not from an enemy, but from within. General Winter, once Russia's greatest ally, now mirrors the coldness of a regime that has abandoned its people for pride. History repeats itself, but never kindly for those who refuse to learn from it. The tide has turned, not only on the map, but in the minds of millions. For every Ukrainian pushing forward, there's a Russian asking, "How did we get here?" The narrative is shifting, power is slipping, and for the first time in this brutal war, Russia's invincibility looks like a myth collapsing under the weight of its own deception. The world is watching not merely to see who wins this war, but to witness whether truth can still triumph over tyranny, even in the darkest winter. When Russia struck Kiev with renewed aggression, the world expected Ukraine to stagger under the weight of the assault. Instead, the response was immediate, calculated, and devastating. Within hours, Ukrainian forces had not only repelled several Russian advances, but also launched deep counterstrikes into the logistical heart of Moscow's war operation. What shocked global observers was not merely the scale of retaliation, but its precision. Ukraine had learned from 2 years of brutal warfare from the blood-soaked trenches of Bakhmut to the destroyed suburbs of Mariupol. Every missile fired, every drone launched, carried months of intelligence and strategic calculation. It was no longer the desperate defense of 2022. It was a masterclass in resilience turned into retribution. Russian commanders, once confident in their numerical superiority, found their supply routes obliterated and communication grids fractured. The Ukrainian army, armed not with abundance but with ingenuity, turned Russia's momentum into paralysis. And this is the turning point in modern warfare when technology, morale, and intelligence outweigh the sheer size of an army. What Moscow underestimated was Ukraine's capacity to absorb pain, to adapt, and to strike back with surgical efficiency. This retaliation was not born of vengeance, but of necessity, forged in the crucible of survival. What Russia intended as domination has backfired into a spectacle of defiance that the world will remember as the moment Ukraine seized control of the narrative. For centuries, General Winter was Russia's most loyal ally, a natural force that destroyed invaders from Napoleon to Hitler. But this time, the bitter cold has betrayed its master. Russian armored convoys, stretched across frozen terrain, became immobilized by the very climate they once weaponized. Diesel froze, artillery malfunctioned, and morale collapsed under the weight of frostbite and hunger. Meanwhile, Ukraine, armed with NATO-grade winter gear and local familiarity, adapted seamlessly to the conditions. It was as if nature itself had shifted allegiance. The cold winds that once whispered of Russian triumph now howled through the ruins of abandoned camps and burned-out tanks. This betrayal symbolizes more than meteorology, it's poetic justice. It exposes the arrogance of a power that believed history would always bend to its advantage. General Winter has turned into a mirror reflecting Russia's internal decay. Outdated logistics, broken command structures, and the delusion that geography could still guarantee victory. What was once Russia's advantage is now its undoing. Ukraine's forces move like ghosts through the snow, reclaiming positions once thought lost. Every frozen Russian tank now stands as a monument to misplaced faith, proof that no empire, however vast, can rely on nature when it has lost moral direction. This winter is not just cold, it's karmic. While the world watches bombs fall, another war rages quietly, the economic collapse inside Russia. Inflation surges, wages crumble, and the ruble sinks beneath sanctions that bite deeper each month. Oligarchs retreat into private fortresses, shielding their fortunes while the common citizen bears the suffering. The cost of this war is not just in tanks and ammunition, but in the dignity of the Russian working class. Factories close, food prices double, and the illusion of national glory collapses under unpaid bills and empty shelves. Moscow's propaganda machine can broadcast victory parades, but it cannot mask the reality that every ruble spent on missiles is stolen from healthcare, education, and the future of a generation. This is what empires always fail to understand. You cannot bomb your way out of economic decay. The Soviet Union learned this truth painfully, and modern Russia is relearning it now. As sanctions choke trade and investment, the economy turns inward, desperate, inefficient, corrupt. The elite survive, the people endure. And as every historian knows, when inequality becomes unbearable, the stability of the state begins to rot from within. The front lines of this war are not only in Donbas or Kharkiv, they are in every Russian home where heat is scarce, bread is expensive, and hope is dying. Ukraine's greatest weapon has never been its military power, it has been its moral resilience. From the first day of invasion, the world witnessed a nation refuse to kneel. That spirit has only grown stronger. Every family displaced, every city rebuilt, every soldier who fights in the cold does so with an unbreakable belief in freedom. This is not nationalism, this is survival through unity. Ukraine's leadership understood early that this war would not be won in a month or a year. It would be won through endurance, and endurance demands adaptation. That's why Ukraine has redefined modern warfare, integrating civilian innovation into military strategy, turning farmers' tractors into tank recovery vehicles, and engineers into drone designers. This resilience is what terrifies Moscow most because it cannot be crushed, cannot be negotiated, cannot be silenced. It represents the triumph of human will over the machinery of oppression. Every Ukrainian counterstrike echoes with a moral authority that Russia cannot manufacture. In the eyes of the world, Ukraine has transformed from victim to symbol, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming force, the human spirit can reshape history. This is not just a war for territory, it's a war for meaning, and Ukraine's resilience has already won that battle. The illusion of Russian invincibility has been shattered. For decades, the Kremlin projected an image of unstoppable might, a superpower capable of bending history to its will. But today, that image lies in ruins. The Russian army bleeds from within, plagued by disorganization, low morale, and mass desertions. Soldiers no longer march with conviction. They march because they fear punishment. The myth that once intimidated the world has dissolved under the weight of its own contradictions. What remains is a frightened bureaucracy clinging to power through deception. Ukraine has exposed what economists and analysts have warned for years, that Russia's strength was a facade, built on fossil fuels, corruption, and repression. Now, as the empire strains to maintain its grasp, even loyalists begin to question the cost of pride. The world sees it too. NATO's unity grows, Europe's defense strengthens, and isolation becomes Russia's new reality. In psychological terms, the Kremlin has lost its greatest weapon, fear. Without that, its empire is hollow. The soldiers who once believed they were liberators now see themselves as pawns in a game of ego. And when belief dies in an army, defeat is only a matter of time. Russia's illusion has collapsed, and no amount of propaganda can resurrect it. What we are witnessing is not just a war between two nations, it's the reshaping of global power itself. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has become the front line of a deeper struggle between truth and tyranny, freedom and domination, democracy and deception. The old world order, where might determined right, is dissolving before our eyes. Every Ukrainian advance represents more than a territorial victory. It's a declaration that smaller nations can defy giants if united by purpose and supported by principle. The ripple effects reach beyond Europe. China watches closely. NATO reorganizes with renewed purpose. The global South recalculates its alliances. In this new era, economic interdependence and information warfare are more decisive than bombs. Russia's failure to dominate Ukraine has shattered the myth that authoritarian systems are more efficient or durable than democracies. This war is the historical inflection point where the empire of intimidation gives way to the coalition of endurance. As Russia weakens, the balance of power shifts not just politically, but ideologically. The question is no longer who controls the land, but who controls the narrative of the 21st century. Ukraine's struggle, born in suffering, may well become the symbol of a new global awakening, a realization that even in the darkest winter, freedom remains humanity's greatest force.